The spark in the shadows. The email arrived at 3:17. A single line glowing on Clara Voss's screen. They're hiding millions. Look at the Cascadia grants. No sender name, no signature, just a file attachment labeled Ledger X. Clara, the billionaire founder of Nexus Analytics, wasn't one for conspiracies. Her empire was built on cold, complex data. Algorithms that predicted market shifts, supply chains, even voter behavior. But this email, slipped through her private server's defenses, felt like a dare. She leaned back in her glass-walled office, the Cascadia skyline glittering beyond, and clicked the file. What she saw wasn't a smoking gun. It was a spark, faint but undeniable, and it would soon ignite a fire no one in the state could extinguish. Clara wasn't supposed to be awake, but sleep had always been a reluctant guest. At 42, she was a paradox, a tech titan who shunned the spotlight, a recluse who wielded more influence than most governors. Her dark hair was pulled into a loose bun, her eyes sharp behind rimless glasses as she scanned the document. It was a fragment of Cascadia's federal grant disbursements, mundane at first glance, rows of numbers, program names, and dollar amounts. But Clara didn't skim. She dissected. One entry caught her. $4. $2 million allocated to something called the Unity Advancement Network. No address, no contact, just a vague description. Community empowerment. She cross-referenced it on her system, pulling public records in seconds. Nothing. No website. No tax filings, no trace. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't a clerical error. It was a void. She dove deeper, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The file was incomplete, but it was enough to start another program. The Horizon Equity Initiative had received $7.8 million. Its listed address was a strip mall in downtown Cascadia, home to a vape shop and a shuttered nail salon. No office, no staff. Clara opened a new tab, pulling IRS data, property records, and anything she could find. The pattern emerged like a ghost in the machine. Dozens of programs, hundreds of millions in federal funds, all funneled to entities that barely existed. Some shared the same P.O. box, while others listed phone numbers that went to voicemail. One group, granted $12 million for youth development, had a website that hadn't been updated since its creation. Its last post a placeholder. Coming soon. Clara leaned back, her chair creaking softly. This wasn't sloppy accounting. This was deliberate. The question gnawed at her. Who was signing off on this? Cascadia's federal funds, intended for schools, hospitals, and infrastructure, came from taxpayers across the nation. Every dollar was supposed to be tracked, justified, and reported, yet here was evidence of millions vanishing into thin air, cloaked in buzzwords like equity and uplift. Clara's mind raced to the state's top official, Marcus Drayton, Cascadia's Attorney General. Drayton was a political heavyweight, a charismatic figure whose speeches on justice and progress filled headlines. His office oversaw the state's legal and financial oversight, including the management of federal grants. If these funds were being misdirected, his signature, or at least his approval, would be on the paperwork. Clara didn't jump to conclusions. She needed proof. She spent the next 3 hours cross-referencing the grants against public databases. By dawn, her office was littered with coffee cups and printouts. The numbers didn't lie. Over $180 million had been spent on programs with no verifiable outcomes in the past 2 years. One grant, $9. $3 million for health equity outreach, funded a series of workshops that reached only 112 people. Another, $15 million for affordable housing solutions, went to a non-profit founded 6 weeks before the grant was awarded, with no prior project. The deeper she dug, the stranger it got. A single address, a nondescript office park, appeared in 7 different grants, each for a different organization. When Clara pulled satellite imagery, the building was half vacant, its parking lot overgrown with weeds. Her stomach tightened. This wasn't just waste, it was a system. Clara knew she couldn't go public yet. The data was damning, but incomplete. The anonymous sender had given her a piece of the puzzle, but she needed the whole picture. She also knew the risks. Accusing a figure like Drayton, who was beloved by half the state and backed by powerful allies, was like throwing a grenade with a short fuse. She'd seen whistleblowers vilified, their lives dissected by media and mobs. Clara wasn't naive. She'd built her company dodging corporate espionage and government scrutiny. But this was different. This was about the public's money, the kind of betrayal that hit families who couldn't afford another tax hike. She couldn't walk away. She needed an ally, someone with the grit to take this fight to the halls of power. Her mind went to Evelyn Hart, a former prosecutor who had turned into a private attorney. Evelyn was a legend in legal circles, a woman who'd taken down corrupt mayors and corporate fraudsters without blinking. At 56, she had a reputation for precision and fearlessness, her silver-streaked hair and sharp suits as much a trademark as her courtroom victories. Clara had met her once, at a tech conference where Evelyn spoke on data privacy. They'd clicked over a shared disdain for bureaucracy. If anyone could turn Clara's numbers into a weapon, it was Evelyn. Clara sent an encrypted message. "Need your expertise. Urgent. Can we meet?" "Within an hour," Evelyn replied. "Name the place." They met that evening at a quiet diner on the edge of Cascadia's capital. Far from the glass towers and political haunts, Clara arrived first, her laptop tucked under her arm, her hoodie and jeans a stark contrast to Evelyn's tailored blazer. The diner smelled of grease and burnt coffee, its booths empty except for a trucker nursing a milkshake. Evelyn slid into the seat across from Clara, her eyes scanning the room before settling on the billionaire. "You look like you haven't slept," she said, not unkindly. Clara smirked. "I haven't." She slid a folder across the table, its pages marked with highlights and sticky notes. "This is what I found," Clara said. "Federal funds, millions of them, going to programs that don't exist. Or if they do, they're not doing what they claim." Evelyn flipped through the pages, her expression unreadable. She paused at a spreadsheet showing $22 million allocated to a group called Cascadia Forward. The organization's address was a mailbox at a UPS store. Evelyn's brow furrowed. "Who's approving this?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. Clara leaned forward. "Every document I've traced leads back to Marcus Drayton's office. His signature's on the approvals, or his deputies.
It's not random.
It's a pattern." Evelyn closed the folder, her fingers drumming lightly on the cover. "You're saying the Attorney General of Cascadia is either incompetent or complicit?" "That's a hell of an accusation." Clara didn't flinch. "I'm saying the data doesn't add up." "You tell me what it means." Evelyn studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll need to verify this. Every number, every signature. If it's real, we're not just talking about a scandal. We're talking about a reckoning." Clara felt a spark of relief, but it was fleeting. She knew what was coming. The pushback, the denials, the threats. Drayton wouldn't go down quietly. Over the next week, Evelyn worked like a bloodhound. She pulled records Clara couldn't access. Court filings, internal memos, even emails obtained through back channels. Clara fed her raw data, running analyses that mapped the flow of funds like a digital bloodstream. Together, they uncovered a network of shell organizations, some linked to political operatives, others to consultants with ties to Drayton's allies. One nonprofit, granted $10 million for workforce training, had no employees but shared a board member with Drayton's former campaign manager. Another, funded for environmental justice, spent its budget on catered events at luxury hotels. The evidence piled up, each piece more damning than the last. Clara barely left her office, her world narrowing to screens and spreadsheets. She wasn't driven by ego or vengeance. It was the principle. Taxpayers deserved to know where their money went. She thought of her employees, single parents and small business owners who paid taxes without complaint, trusting the system to work. This betrayal wasn't abstract. It was personal. But she also knew the cost of speaking out. Her company was already a target for regulators, her innovations scrutinized by those who feared her influence. Going after Drayton could paint a bigger bullseye on her back. Evelyn, meanwhile, was mapping the battlefield. She reached out to a contact in Congress, a reform-minded senator who owed her a favor. "We need a hearing," she told Clara during a late-night call. "Public, televised, no hiding. If we're doing this, we do it where everyone can see." Clara hesitated. She'd spent her career avoiding the spotlight, letting her work speak for itself. But Evelyn was right. The truth needed a stage. "What about Drayton?" Clara asked. "He'll fight back." Evelyn's voice was steel. "Let him. If he's clean, he'll show up. If he's not, his silence will speak for him." The decision was made. Evelyn drafted a formal request for a congressional oversight hearing, citing credible evidence of federal fund mismanagement in Cascadia. Clara prepared her data, distilling millions of transactions into clear, irrefutable visuals. They worked in secret, knowing a leak could tip off Drayton's team. The anonymous sender never contacted Clara again, but she didn't need them. The spark had caught, and the fire was spreading. She thought of the email's final words. "Look at the Cascadia grants." Whoever sent it had trusted her to finish the job. She wouldn't let them down. As the hearing date approached, Clara felt the weight of what was coming. She wasn't naive. She knew truth didn't always win. Drayton's allies were already circling, whispering about her motives. Was she a crusader or a capitalist with an agenda? The media would pounce, with some praising her courage and others painting her as a meddler. She didn't care about the headlines. She cared about the numbers, and the numbers told the story no one could ignore. Hundreds of millions, meant for the public good, had vanished into a maze of lies. Clara closed her laptop as the city lights flickered outside. This wasn't about her. It was about every person who'd trusted the system, and the system that had failed them. She took a deep breath. The fight was just beginning. The reckoning. The chamber of the Cascadia state capitol was a cathedral of power, its marble columns and vaulted ceilings designed to awe as much as to serve a purpose. On this day, it buzzed with a restless energy, like a hive stirred by an unseen threat. Reporters lined the back, cameras trained on the long mahogany table where Clara Voss and Evelyn Hart sat, their faces composed but resolute. The room was packed. Lawmakers, aides, activists, and curious citizens filled every seat, their whispers a low hum beneath the fluorescent lights. Clara adjusted her glasses, her laptop open before her, its screen glowing with data that could unravel a state's secrets. Evelyn, beside her, held a thick binder, its pages tabbed and annotated, a weapon disguised as paperwork. Across the room, an empty chair bore a nameplate, Marcus Drayton, Attorney General. Its vacancy was louder than any speech, a silent accusation that hung over the proceedings. Clara felt the weight of every eye in the room, but she didn't flinch. She wasn't here to perform. She was here to expose a truth that had been buried too long. And the numbers would do the talking. The hearing began with the usual formalities. Opening statements, procedural remarks, and a senator's attempt at humor that fell flat. Clara barely listened, her focus on the screen before her, where graphs and maps waited to come alive. Evelyn had coached her. Stay calm, stick to the data, let the evidence speak. But Clara knew this wasn't just about numbers, it was about trust, public trust, betrayed by a system that thrived on opacity. When the committee chair, a grizzled senator with a reputation for fairness, called Evelyn to speak, the room stilled. She rose, her silver-streaked hair catching the light, and walked to the podium with the steady gait of a general entering battle. "This isn't about politics," she began, her voice clear and unyielding. "This is about accountability, about your money, taxpayer money, and where it's going." She clicked a remote, and the screen behind her lit up with a single image. A wire transfer receipt, $5, $6 million, sent from a federal education grant to an organization called Cascadia Unity Hub. The address: a mailbox at a shipping store in the capital's outskirts. No website, no staff, no record of any educational activity. Evelyn let the image linger, her eyes sweeping the room. This money was meant for classrooms, she said, for teachers, for books, for kids. Instead, it went to a ghost. And this is just the beginning. Another click, another slide. A $3.2 million grant for community wellness, awarded to a group that hosted a single event, a healing circle with 43 attendees, costing $74,000 per participant. Gasps rippled through the crowd, reporters scribbling furiously. Evelyn didn't pause. Slide after slide appeared. A $9 million housing grant to a non-profit that dissolved 3 months after receiving the funds. A $12.4 million youth empowerment program with no listed beneficiaries. A $7 million green equity initiative that paid for private jet travel for its consultants. Each slide was a gut punch, but Evelyn saved the sharpest blow for last. She projected a flowchart, its lines connecting dozens of grants to a single point. The office of Marcus Drayton. Every approval, every fast-tracked contract, every vague program bore his department's stamp. This isn't a coincidence, Evelyn said, her tone measured but merciless. This is a pattern, and patterns demand answers. She paused, letting the silence press against the room's edges. The question isn't whether this happened. The question is why and who benefited. The chamber erupted. A few lawmakers shouted objections, claiming the evidence was incomplete, accusing Evelyn of grandstanding. Others sat frozen, their faces pale, as if the data had pinned them to their seats. Clara watched it all, her heart pounding, but her resolve unshaken. She'd expected pushback. Drayton's allies were powerful, their influence woven into the state's political fabric. But she also saw something else. The reporters leaning forward, the citizens in the gallery whispering to each other, the live feed streaming to thousands online. The truth was out, and it was spreading faster than any rebuttal. The chair called for order, then turned to Clara. Ms. Voss, you've been referenced as the source of this data. Would you like to speak? Clara nodded, rising slowly. She wasn't a public speaker. Her world was code and algorithms, not microphones and crowds, but she'd prepared for this. She connected her laptop to the projector, and the screen displayed a new image. A heat map of Cascadia, marked with red dots. Each marker represented a grant recipient, clustered in ways that defied logic. I'm not here to speculate, she began, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. I'm here to show you what the data says. She zoomed in on one marker, a $10 million grant to Cascadia Forward. The address was a vacant lot, confirmed by satellite imagery she'd pulled the week before. Another marker, $8 million for workforce training, led to an office suite leased by a company that existed only on paper. Clara clicked again, revealing a network graph. Lines linking grants to shared addresses, board members, and even bank accounts. This isn't random, she said. 27 organizations receiving over $130 million, share connections that suggest coordination. Some have no physical presence, others have no outcomes, but all have one thing in common. They were approved by the Attorney General's office. The room went quiet, the kind of silence that feels like a held breath. Clara pressed forward, showing a timeline. Over the course of 3 years, Cascadia's federal funding had spiked, but the most significant increases went to programs labeled as social equity or community advancement. She highlighted one, $15 million for a housing initiative that leased hotel rooms, not for Cascadia's homeless, but for individuals with no documented residency. This isn't about who received the services, Clara said carefully. It's about the fact that no one can verify who they were, or whether the services even happened. She paused, meeting the eyes of a senator who'd been skeptical. When millions disappear without a trace, it's not an accident. It's a design. The questions came fast. A congressman demanded to know if she was accusing Drayton of fraud. Clara didn't take the bait. right. I'm not here to assign motives, she said. I'm here to show facts. The data shows 180 million in unaccounted funds. If there's an explanation, I'd love to hear it. Another lawmaker asked if the programs might simply be poorly managed rather than being malicious. Clara tilted her head, a rare flash of dry humor in her voice. If dozens of organizations, all receiving millions, all fail to report outcomes, and all share the same mailbox, how many coincidences do we accept before we call it something else? The hearing broke for a recess, and the chamber dissolved into chaos. Reporters swarmed Clara and Evelyn, shouting questions about Drayton, lawsuits, and the political fallout. Clara stayed silent, letting Evelyn field the press with her trademark poise. "We're not here to sensationalize," Evelyn told a journalist. "We're here to ask why taxpayer money is funding shadows instead of schools." Clara watched the crowd, noting the lawmakers huddled in the corners and the aides typing furiously on their phones. The live feed was trending online, clips of her heat map going viral. She felt a mix of relief and dread. The truth was out, but the fight was far from over. When the hearing resumed, the empty chair at the front drew every eye. Marcus Drayton hadn't shown up. His office had sent a brief statement, read aloud by the chair. "The Attorney General's office is committed to transparency and will review all claims. We regret that we are unable to attend due to prior obligations." The words landed like a dud firecracker, met with murmurs and a few stifled laughs. Evelyn didn't acknowledge it. She stood again, this time with a new set of documents. "Let's talk about outcomes," she said. "If these programs worked, we'd see results. Let's see what we got for our money." She started with a $6 million grant for minority education advancement. The goal was to boost graduation rates in underserved schools. The result? Graduation rates hadn't budged. In some districts, they'd dropped. Another grant? $8 million for mental health access. Funded a series of pop-up clinics that served fewer than 200 people with no follow-up care. A $10 million public safety program produced nothing but a website and a few social media posts. Evelyn's voice grew quieter as she spoke, not softer but heavier, as if the weight of the failure pressed on her words. "This isn't about whether these goals matter," she said. "It's about whether the people in charge delivered. They didn't." The room was a powder keg now, every slide adding fuel. A senator, one of Drayton's allies, tried to derail the presentation, arguing that the hearing was unfairly targeting equity programs. Evelyn didn't blink. "If equity means wasting millions while kids go without textbooks, we need a new definition," she said. The retort drew scattered applause, quickly hushed by the chair. Clara watched, marveling at Evelyn's command. She wasn't just presenting evidence, she was reshaping the narrative. This wasn't about ideology. It was about betrayal. Then came the twist. Evelyn set down her remote and looked directly at the committee. "Voss has one more piece to share," she said. "It's not about grants, it's about people." Clara stood, her hands steady as she loaded a new file. The screen showed a map of Cascadia's capital, red dots marking specific addresses. She zoomed in on one, a hotel, which had been granted $7 million under a housing stability program. "This isn't a shelter," Clara said. "It's a commercial hotel, fully leased. Not to Cascadia residents, but to individuals with no recorded status. No logs, no oversight, no accountability." She clicked again, showing another hotel, then another, each tied to similar grants. Over $20 million in housing funds went to temporary lodging with no public reporting. "We don't know who stayed there, or for how long. We don't even know if they existed." The revelation hit like a shockwave. Lawmakers who'd been silent now leaned forward, some scribbling notes, others whispering to aides. Clara pressed on, showing a timeline. Over 2 years, Cascadia's housing grants had surged by 280%, approved through contracts that bypassed public review. Every contract looped back to Drayton's office, This isn't about immigration or policy, Clara said, anticipating the counterattack. It's about transparency. If you're spending public money, you have to show where it went. They didn't. Evelyn stepped in, her voice cutting through the rising murmurs. Let me be clear, she said. If these programs were legitimate, we'd have records. We'd have names, dates, and outcomes. We have nothing. And when we asked for answers, we got silence. She gestured to Drayton's empty chair, the move subtle but devastating. If the Attorney General has nothing to hide, why isn't he here? The question hung in the air, unanswered, but deafening. The committee chair cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable, and called for a brief pause. The room exploded into motion, reporters rushing to file stories, lawmakers huddling with staffs, citizens in the gallery shouting questions. Clara sat back, her pulse racing but her mind clear. The hearing had done its job. The data was public. The questions were inescapable, and Drayton's absence was its indictment. She glanced at Evelyn, who gave her a slight nod, the barest hint of a smile. They'd planned for this moment, knowing it would shift the ground beneath Cascadia's power structure, but Clara also knew the backlash was coming. Drayton's allies would spin this as an attack on progress, a billionaire's vendetta, anything to muddy the truth. She didn't care. The numbers were out there, and numbers didn't lie. As the hearing wrapped, the committee chair promised a follow-up session and possible investigations. Evelyn packed her binder, her movements deliberate, while Clara disconnected her laptop. The reporters were still circling, but Clara slipped out a side door, needing air. Outside, the Capitol's plaza was alive with protesters and news vans. The story already breaking online, she pulled up her phone, scanning the headlines. Billionaire exposes Cascadia funding scandal. Where did the money go? Attorney General faces questions. She scrolled through social media, where her heat map was being shared thousands of times. Alongside clips of Evelyn's takedown, the public was waking up, demanding answers, tagging their officials with questions about local spending. Clara leaned against a stone pillar, the weight of the day settling in. She'd done what she came to do, but this was only the beginning. Drayton's silence wouldn't hold forever. He'd fight back, and his allies would hit hard. Other states were already watching, their officials scrambling to review their books. The hearing hadn't just exposed Cascadia, it had lit a fuse that could burn across the country. Clara thought of the anonymous email that started it all, its cryptic warning. They're hiding millions. She didn't know who sent it, but she'd kept her promise. The truth was out, and no amount of spin could bury it again. Evelyn joined her outside, her coat slung over one arm. You held your own in there, she said, her tone warm but not soft. Clara shrugged. I just showed the data. You made it land. Evelyn chuckled, but her eyes were serious. This isn't over. Drayton's got friends, and they don't like losing. But we've got the public now. That's something. Clara nodded, her mind already turning to the next steps. More data, more connections, more light in the shadows. The reckoning had begun, and she was ready for what came next. The ripple effect. The morning after the Cascadia State Capitol hearing, the city woke to a storm. Newsstands sold out, their headlines screaming, Billionaires' data bombshell rocks Cascadia, Attorney General's office under fire. Where's our money? Social media was a wildfire. Clara Voss's heat map, shared millions of times, paired with hashtags like Cascadia cover-up and follow the money. Protesters gathered outside the Attorney General's office, their signs demanding answers from Marcus Drayton, whose silence had become a symbol of guilt. Clara watched it unfold from her office, the skyline dimmed by a rare fog. She hadn't slept, her mind replaying the hearing, Evelyn's razor-sharp delivery, the empty chair, the gasps that followed each slide. The truth was out. But Clara knew better than to celebrate. Truth was a spark. Keeping it alive was the real fight. And the forces she'd challenged were already regrouping. Clara scrolled through her phone, scanning reactions. A local journalist had visited one of the addresses she'd flagged. a supposed non-profit office that turned out to be a boarded-up storefront. Another reporter traced a $6 million grant to a consulting firm linked to Drayton's former campaign strategist. The evidence was piling up, each revelation fueling public outrage, but there were counterattacks too. A prominent columnist called Clara a tech overlord meddling in democracy, accusing her of weaponizing data to undermine social progress. A Cascadia council member, loyal to Drayton, went on television, dismissing the hearing as a stunt by a billionaire with too much time. Clara didn't flinch. She'd expected the mudslinging. What worried her was the silence from Drayton himself. Men like him didn't stay quiet unless they were planning something big. Evelyn Hart, meanwhile, was a force of nature. She appeared on a national morning show, holding up one of Clara's printouts, a wire transfer to a ghost non-profit. "This isn't about politics," she told the host, her voice steady as steel. "It's about accountability. If you're spending public money, you don't get to hide." The clip went viral, shared by taxpayers across the country who saw their frustrations in Cascadia's scandal. Evelyn's phone didn't stop ringing. Lawmakers seeking her advice, governors asking for audits, citizens thanking her for speaking up. She'd become more than a prosecutor. She was a symbol of what happened when someone refused to look away. Clara stayed out of the spotlight, letting Evelyn handle the media. Her focus was always on the data. She spent hours analyzing new records, cross-referencing grants from other states to see if Cascadia's pattern was unique. It wasn't. In 3 neighboring states, she found similar anomalies, vague programs, untraceable recipients, and spikes in equity funding with no measurable outcomes. She sent the findings to Evelyn, who forwarded them to her congressional contacts. The ripples were spreading, and Clara knew they'd soon hit a tipping point. If other states started digging, the scandal could redefine how the nation handled public funds. The public's anger was palpable. Town halls overflowed as citizens demanded itemized budgets from their officials. In Cascadia, a group of teachers protested outside a school board meeting, holding signs that read, "Our kids deserve the millions you lost." A single mother, interviewed by a local news crew, broke down in tears, describing how her son's school lacked basic supplies, while millions funded healing circles for no one. Clara watched the footage, her jaw tight. This was why she'd acted, not for fame, not for power, but for people like that mother, betrayed by a system they'd trusted. The stories humanized her data, turning numbers into faces, and they kept her going. A week after the hearing, the pressure reached a breaking point. Congress announced a bipartisan proposal, the Public Funds Transparency Act. It would mandate detailed disclosures for every federal grant, with quarterly reports accessible online. The bill's timing was no coincidence. Clara's maps and Evelyn's testimony had lit a fire under lawmakers who couldn't afford to look complicit. Over 70 House members signed on, a mix of reformers and opportunists, all sensing the public's mood. Clara saw the news and allowed herself a rare smile. She posted a single emoji on her social media, a magnifying glass. The message was clear. Keep looking. But the victory was fragile. Drayton broke his silence that same day, stepping into a press conference flanked by advisors and a carefully curated crowd of supporters. The cameras caught his every move, his tailored suit and measured expression, a stark contrast to the chaos around him. "I've served Cascadia with integrity," he began, his voice smooth but strained. The recent hearing was a distraction, a dangerous attempt to discredit programs that uplift our most vulnerable communities. He didn't mention Clara or Evelyn by name, but the jab was apparent. "We're reviewing all claims," he added, "but I won't let fear-mongering derail our commitment to justice." The room waited for more, an explanation, a defense, anything. Instead, Drayton pivoted, accusing outside agitators of twisting data to sow division. When a reporter asked about the $180 million in unaccounted funds, he paused, his eyes narrowing. "Every program is under review," he repeated. "We'll share findings when appropriate." He left the stage abruptly, ignoring shouted questions about the empty storefronts and ghost non-profits. The performance was polished but hollow, and it backfired. Social media lit up with mockery. If you're innocent, why dodge the questions? Show us the receipts. Marcus. Clara watched the clips, her gut telling her Drayton was buying time, not answering. Evelyn wasn't surprised. She called Clara that night, her voice calm but urgent. "He's circling the wagons," she said. That press conference was for his base, not the public. He's betting he can outlast the outrage. Clara frowned, staring at her laptop screen, where a new dataset glowed. "What's his play?" she asked. Evelyn didn't hesitate. Deflection. He'll lean on allies to reframe this as an attack on equity, not a scandal. If that fails, he'll find a scapegoat, some mid-level staffer to take the fall. Clara nodded, her mind already mapping the next moves. "Then we keep pushing," she said. More data, more exposure. He can't outrun the numbers. The pushback grew louder. A coalition of activists, backed by Drayton's allies, held a rally outside the Capitol, claiming Clara's crusade was a war on progress. They waved signs. "Protect our communities. Stop the billionaire bully." A few pundits echoed the narrative, arguing that Clara's wealth made her an unfit champion for transparency. "She's not one of us." A cable news host sneered. "She's a tech baron playing hero." Clara ignored the noise, but it stung. She'd built her company from nothing, coding in a dorm room while her peers partied. She wasn't a saint, but she wasn't a villain either. She was just someone who couldn't unsee the truth. Evelyn, unfazed, doubled down. She went on another news show, this time with a stack of documents Clara had prepared. "Let's talk about what's really at stake," she said, holding up a photo of an abandoned office tied to a $4 million grant. "This isn't progress. This is theft." She challenged Drayton directly. "If you're proud of these programs, come to Congress. Testify under oath. Show us the results." The invitation was a gauntlet, and Drayton's continued absence only deepened the public's distrust. Polls showed a sharp drop in confidence in Cascadia's government, with 68% of voters demanding an independent audit. The numbers were a vindication, but Clara knew they came at a cost. Behind closed doors, the fallout was reshaping the power structure in the Cascadia region. 3 staffers from Drayton's office were quietly reassigned, their departures unannounced, but noticed by insiders. A whistleblower, emboldened by the hearing, leaked internal emails showing Drayton's team had fast-tracked grants without proper vetting. The emails didn't prove fraud, but they proved negligence, and they kept the story alive. Clara analyzed the leaks, finding new connections. Some funds had flowed to out-of-state accounts, while others had gone to political action groups tied to Drayton's allies. She shared the data with Evelyn, who passed it to investigative journalists. The stories multiplied, each one a crack in the system's facade. Other states took notice. Governors in 5 states announced reviews of their federal spending, citing concerns raised in Cascadia. A senator from a Midwestern state called for a national audit, arguing that taxpayers deserved clarity. Clara's inbox was filled with messages from strangers, analysts offering to help, citizens sharing their own stories of mismanaged funds. One email from a retired accountant in a rural town stood out. "I've seen this before. Our county lost $2 million to a development scam. Keep fighting." Clara saved the message, a reminder of why she'd started. The Transparency Act gained momentum, its sponsors touting it as a shield against future scandals. Clara didn't testify again. She didn't need to. Her data was everywhere, quoted in editorials, debated on talk shows, and even memed online. Evelyn, however, became the movement's public face. She spoke at a congressional briefing, outlining how states could implement real-time grant tracking. "This isn't about tearing down good programs," she said. "It's about making sure they work." Her words resonated, cutting through the noise of partisan bickering. By the end of the month, the bill had 92 co-sponsors, a rare show of unity in a divided Congress. Clara reflected on the personal toll. She'd always been private, her life a fortress of routine, code, coffee, quiet. Now, her name was a lightning rod. Her motives dissected by strangers. She'd received threats, primarily online, but a few were serious enough to warrant security at her office. Her board urged her to step back. Worried about Nexus Analytics' stock price, she refused. This wasn't about her company or her legacy. It was about the principle. No one, not even a state's most powerful official, should be above scrutiny. She thought of the anonymous email that had started it all. Its sender still a mystery. Whoever they were, they'd trusted her to act. She wouldn't stop now. Drayton's political future grew murkier. He remained in office, but his influence was eroding. Allies distanced themselves, and a primary challenger emerged, campaigning on the issue of transparency. Drayton's press conference had been his last public appearance. Rumors swirled of an impending resignation. Clara didn't care about his fate. Her focus was the system, how it had failed, and how it could be fixed. She began working on an open-source platform to track public funds, free for any state to use. It was her way of ensuring the ripples continued to spread long after the headlines faded. Evelyn, too, was changing. She'd never sought fame, but the scandal had made her a national figure. She accepted a role advising a federal task force on grant oversight, her expertise now shaping policy. In a rare moment of candor, she told Clara over coffee, "I thought I'd seen it all, but this showed me how much we've let slide." Clara nodded, understanding. The scandal hadn't just exposed Drayton, it had exposed a culture of complacency, where good intentions excused bad outcomes. The movement grew beyond Cascadia. Investigative reporters, inspired by Clara's data, uncovered similar scandals in other states. A $10 million health equity grant in one state that funded a single conference, a $15 million housing program in another that built nothing. The stories fed a national conversation, with voters demanding more than promises from their leaders. News anchors, once dismissive, now asked sharper questions. Federal agencies tightened their grant guidelines, wary of being the following headline. Clara's magnifying glass had become a spotlight, and it wasn't dimming. In Cascadia, the changes were tangible. The state legislature passed a law requiring real-time grant reporting, a direct response to the scandal. Schools received emergency funding, redirected from cancelled equity programs that couldn't justify their budgets. Citizens formed watchdog groups, poring over public records with a zeal that made officials nervous. Clara saw it all, not as a victory, but as a step forward. The system wasn't fixed, but it was waking up. One evening, Clara stood on her office balcony, the city below alive with lights. She thought of the mother on the news, the accountant's email, the thousands who'd shared her maps. They were the real force, not her or Evelyn. The scandal had started with a single email, a spark in the dark. But it had grown because people cared. She opened her laptop, pulling up her tracking platform. It wasn't finished, but it was close. A tool to keep the light on, no matter who tried to hide. Evelyn's words echoed in her mind. We've got the public now. That's something. It was more than something. It was everything. The question lingered, not just for Cascadia, but for every state and every taxpayer. What happens when the truth becomes undeniable? Clara didn't have all the answers, but she'd made sure the question was asked. And as long as people kept asking, the shadows would have nowhere to hide.